Sword singers were a league of Yokudan fighters who adhered to the way of the sword, a combative ideology on scimitar dexterity. Singers were talented with astounding accomplishments of swordplay, and were perceived by some to be as much sorcerers as fighters. They desired courage of body and of mind. Albeit the custom of sword singing begun in Yokuda, it was imported to the coasts of Tamriel by the Redguards in the First Era. The sword singers were auxiliary in claiming the total province of Hammerfell, and constituting a new motherland for the Yokudan people. The most talented sword singer in history was Frandar Hunding, whose scripts on the affair were admired by Redguards centuries later. In the days of old, the Yokudan people were once craftsmen, writers, mystics, and philosophers, but the ongoing civil wars that infected the nation concluded in many seeking wisdom through the way of the sword, also known as the Song of the Blade. This ultimately advanced into a martial custom known as sword singing. Through the construction of elaborate swords diluted with magic, their workmanship and poems not only preserved but thrived. Sword singers deemed that the sword was high caliber compared to other types of arms, and were dedicated to utilizing it solely. Anything else would only direct to turmoil in their passage in seeking proficiency. The sword singers erected synagogues to the gods of warfare and coaching halls named the Halls of the Virtues of War, in which they could sharpen their combat techniques and the art of manufacturing compelling swords. They cherished warrior gods such as Ansei, who presented ancient Yokudans with how to stretch their knives into swords, Diagna, an embodiment of the Hunding, who delivered them orichalcum weapons, and Leki, the goddess of bizarre swordplay, who popularized the singers to the ethereal feint technique. The sword singers originally enlisted from among the children of noble families. New affiliates were confirmed into the order at age 11. Males became known as the Brothers of the Blade, while females acquired the title Maidens of the Spirit Sword. In later centuries, mastery of the way was accomplished upon overcoming the walkabout, a wilderness expedition recreating the life of Frandar Hunding, where singers would roam the terrain, finishing off beasts and assisting the people in the name of honor. The walkabout could take years to finish, and some singers did not survive the trials. Although the sword singers were at no time copious people, due to a bleak and relentless desert way of living, they had a compelling domination on Yokuda. Within a few generations, the way of the sword had become their life, and was seeded into Yokudan society. For the singers, the sword was pictured as an expansion of their soul and an emblem of honor. They cultivated that it was the swordsman, not the sword, that was of importance. An assortment of fables and sagas tell of masters needing only a plain wooden training sword to vanquish their rivals. Such was the cloud of the way of the sword to Yokudan lifestyle, that even mundane items bore illustrations of swords or warriors assuming brawling stances. The tremendous among the sword singers were known as Saints of the Sword, or Ansei in Yoku. Ansei had the capacity to embody a sword from their very soul, known as a Shehai, or spirit sword. By pure force of willpower, an Ansei warrior could construct the celestial sword of true understanding, and it would take aspect in their hand. This manner of the way became known as the Shehai Shenshiru, or way of the spirit sword. All sword singers trained to grasp this form through acute training and rumination in the way of the sword, but not all swordsmen were fruitful in developing into an Ansei. Those who could were told to be beyond mortal. They dominated excessive adherence to the gods of war, boundless fervor, and a focus and competence far ahead of what others could ever attain. Contrarily, there have been specific capable individuals who could assemble a Shehai from a very young age or with insufficient or no training. Other times, a Shehai may be forged in times of immense tension. Ansei were also acknowledged to ruminate utilizing large egg-shaped crystals, many of which survived into the mid-Second Era after being passed down to their descendants. To become an Ansei of the highest echelon, a sword singer had to exhibit capacity to form the Shehai. These Shehai were described as commonly pallid, hazy, fanciful, and as if it was built of light and incandescence. Frequently its aspect wouldn't even be notably sword-like, and would be of no benefit as a substantial sword. Ansei, desiring to acquire the greatest title of first rank, were enforced to depart from their most cherished weapons and war apparatus before attempting an arduous commencement ritual. If they prevailed, they would no longer need commonplace weapons. Ansei of the second rank and above were known to possess the qualification to not only compose the Shehai, but brandish it as a weapon in assault. Their Shehai gleamed brilliantly and was much more lethal. Described as an unstoppable weapon of great might that could lacerate foes like a scythe through wheat, demilitarizing such an Ansei could only be done by decapitation or abducting their mind. These swordsmen generally began their own training academies, teaching their individual way of the sword. There was some confirmation, however, that proposed the Shehai of an Ansei could be blasted, yielding only behind its essence. Ansei of the supreme ethic meandered the terrain, participating in combat, righting wrongs, and searching to end the conflict. To them, embodying the Shehai was told to have come as instinctively as breathing. When the warrior constellation briefly took a temporal appearance in the mid-Second Era, he possessed an extraordinarily dominant Shehai that was able of generating seismic waves and magical gales. There had always been a break among the bourgeois of Yokuda and the sword singers. However, much was done to calm hostilities in the Empire. Randik Torn, their heir at the time, rehabilitated the gulf by proposing constraints on the bearing of swords. Torn's sword hunt, as it was known, implied that only the singers were authorized to wear swords, which esteemed them from the rest of the populace. After Randik Torn's death, a violent civil war broke out. Among this turmoil, the most proficient sword singer in history, Frandar Hunding, grew up. Hunding was so adept in swordsmanship that by the age of 14 he could utilize his capabilities to cater to his mother and 4 brothers. When the war launched, Hunding was still a juvenile, but a daunting sword singer in his own interest. By the age of 30, he had attained such dexterity and aptitude that he decisively stopped utilizing the authentic swords and began using the Shehai. In order to carry on his acumen and expertise, he wrote his own tenet on the way of the sword, titled the Book of Circles. It was recognized as the categorical compendium for sword singers in the centuries that followed. In the First Era, 780, Emperor Hira pursued to grapple domination of the empire from the people by annihilating the sword singers. The singers quickly became a minority, and impotent to rally collectively into an army that could protect their homes and lives. Frandar Hunding, who the singers saw as their champion, led a revolt against the emperor in what became known as the War of the Singers. Hunding was triumphant, but less than 20,000 sword singers survived. Unappreciated among the public and no longer accepted, Hunding and his army left Yokuda and began their great exodus to Hammerfell. Sometime after Hunding's retreat, Yokuda capsized into the sea. Tales blamed the calamity on a rebel party of Ansei called the Hiradirge. The Hiradirge were said to be professionals of stone magic, and when they were routed during the last civil war, they drove their reprisal on the nation by using taboo means ostensibly adequate of such destruction. Indeed, the celestial warrior authenticated this tale when he declared that the Shehai of a first-rank Ansei is what capsized Yokuda. Additionally, some reports claim that this taboo sword stroke was known as the Pancradle sword, a procedure that could dismantle the very laws of nature. Following Yokuda's eradication, numerous waves of evacuees and warriors known as the Ra-Gada departed to Hammerfell. Amidst them were gifted sword singers and Ansei, such as the brilliant Yagub's 13, King Sakwan's battalion of sword singers, or the legendary band of Master Ansei known only as the Four. Imposing singers such as these seized the complete province and founded a new home for the Yokudans. Numerous training academies for swordsmen were also erected in the early days of Hammerfell. Warriors known as the Ankara trekked east into Craglorn and constructed Hel Ra Citadel, a colossal compound believed to be utilized as an Ansei training arena. Others created the Abbey of the Blades and the Rani Za, School of Warriors. Rani Za, allegedly devoted to the warrior constellation, taught students to become sword disciples by finalizing 5 progressively backbreaking assessments of durability and expertise. Correspondingly, the training academy at Leki's Blade in the Alakir Desert was assembled around this time after an immense engagement between Leki, goddess of bizarre swordplay, and distinguished swordsman Radha al-Saran. After the clash, the last of the Ansei founded the school where their sword expertise could be handed down to later generations. Centuries later, the academy continued to be a favored venue of study and was considered the swordsman's most humble site. Local lore claims that the phantoms of the dead Ansei watch over the disciples training in the temple. When Hammerfell challenged a considerable danger from a band of omnipotent elven necromancers, the Ansei champions Maja, Radon, and Halala sacrificed themselves to defend the people from the risen corpses. As part of a stipulation with Tuwaka, each Ansei siphoned their souls into the sword they brandished in life. These blades became known as the Ansei Wards, and would defend the homeland from even the most mighty of necromancy. After seizing Hammerfell, the Yokudans found themselves in a time of proportionate unity. Many warriors put down their blades in order to raise their new nation. Within 3 lifetimes, many deserted the Book of Circles and lost sight to the teachings of the Way of the Sword. Ansei warriors were even more scarce, and although many training halls were created throughout Hammerfell, very few composed masters of the Shehai. However, a trifling amount of eminent swordsmen did exist during this age of recession, such as Gaiden Shinji and Ansei Makala Leki. When Hammerfell came under barrage from a race of giant goblins, the Queen of Ojwambu besieged with Derek Hallen, the last of the Ansei. According to myth, Hallen called forth the specters of long-dead Ansei to alleviate him in his protection of the city. Various Ansei warriors arose and battled alongside Hallen until they were triumphant. Other reports state that Hallen scoured the land to locate the 5 robust swords that ended a comparable goblin attack during the time of Frandar Hunding. Although their use was banned, Hallen used the swords and crushed the goblin army. Because of this, their Shehai was forever shattered. Whatever the circumstance, Hallen defended the people and re-established the teachings of Frandar Hunding to Hammerfell. Although the Redguards still esteemed the teaching of the Way of the Sword, and were awe-inspiring warriors in their own right, the number of sword singers increasingly declined as time moved onward. By the mid-Second Era, there were no known Ansei warriors, and some foreign philosophers ridiculed the Shehai as superstitious nonsense. Training schools, such as Rani Za, were still honored and distinguished institutions among Redguards, but for nameless reasons the Ansei quietly died out. The Abbey of the Blades held true to the teachings of acclaimed singers along with Frandar Hunding, Ra Abba, Ansei Kalam, and Satame, and some students even desired to revitalize the ancient art, but were eventually fruitless. Even skilled swordsmen of the time, such as Master Aram Sesnet and Sai Sahan, were seen as commonplace compared to the Ansei of old. By the 3rd and 4th eras, Ansei were virtually a fabrication. Although there were some who pursued the old ways within the archaic halls of Virtues of War, very few Redguards had ever seen a Shehai, let alone name forth one. Some facets of the martial art survived through the eras, however, and Redguards persisted among the most intimidating and naturally proficient warriors in Tamriel.